The sound of glass shattering echoed through the night. Grandma stood by the window, her hands trembling, her frail body shaking with fear. Outside, the neighborhood was no longer the quiet, friendly place it once was. Neighbors who used to share food and laughter were now screaming at each other. Stones flew across the street. Doors slammed, and angry voices filled the air like thunder. "Please stop. Please stop," Grandma cried, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "We are neighbors, not enemies. We are supposed to live in peace." But no one listened. It was as if her voice was lost in the chaos. 2 houses down, someone set a trash bin on fire, and the flames rose angrily into the dark sky. Dogs barked, children wailed, and mothers pulled their little ones inside, locking the doors tightly. Grandma clutched her chest as her heart raced. She had lived in this neighborhood for more than 40 years. She had watched families grow, watched children she once carried in her arms become adults. She never imagined that the same street would one day feel like a battlefield. A stone suddenly flew through her own window, smashing the flower vase she had treasured for years. Grandma screamed and fell back. The pieces scattered all over the floor. That vase had belonged to her late husband. Losing it felt like losing him all over again. "Why is this happening?" she whispered, her voice shaking with pain. She pressed her back against the wall as the shouting outside grew louder. The once friendly neighbors were tearing each other apart. It felt like war. Then came the most shocking sound of all. 3 loud bangs on her front door. Bang, bang, bang. Grandma froze. Her tears stopped for a moment, replaced by sheer terror. The banging grew harder, louder, faster. "Open up, old woman," a voice shouted from outside. "We know you're in there." Grandma covered her mouth with her hands. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even move. Her knees were weak, her heart pounding so fast she thought it might burst. She knew that if she opened the door, everything would change forever. And that was the moment the story began. Many years before that night, life in the neighborhood was different. The air was filled with laughter, not anger. People greeted one another with smiles. Grandma was known by everyone, not just as an old woman who lived alone in the small brick house on the corner, but as the heart of the street. She baked cookies for the children, offered advice to the parents, and watered the flowers that made the lane beautiful. Her house was like a second home to many of the kids. They would run into her yard after school, chasing each other, their laughter echoing like music. Grandma never complained. Instead, she always had lemonade waiting for them. "Children should always know joy," she would say with her soft smile. But slowly, things began to change. It started with little arguments. One neighbor complained about another's fence being too close to his land. Someone else got angry because of loud music. At first, Grandma thought it was normal. After all, even families argue sometimes. But the arguments didn't stop, they grew. And with each passing month, the peace she had always known began to crumble. Grandma tried to stop it. She would gather the neighbors, telling them stories about forgiveness, reminding them of the times when they all shared meals together. Sometimes they listened. Sometimes they nodded politely. But once they left her porch, the bitterness returned. Then came the incident with Mr. Henry and Mr. Clark. They were once best friends, always helping each other fix their cars and sharing tools. But one evening, their fight over a small piece of land turned violent. They screamed so loudly that the whole neighborhood came out to watch. Grandma had rushed in between them, her hands raised. "Stop this madness," she begged. "You two are like brothers." But neither listened. Mr. Clark shoved Mr. Henry so hard that he fell into the bushes. That night, a line was drawn in the neighborhood. People took sides. Some stood with Mr. Henry, others with Mr. Clark. From that moment, the street was never the same. Whispers began to spread. Neighbors who used to share sugar now slammed doors in each other's faces. Fights broke out over the smallest things. Where someone parked their car, whose dog barked too much, who left trash on the sidewalk. Grandma's once joyful neighborhood was becoming poisoned by hate. She prayed every night for peace. She tried to keep everyone together, but the anger was stronger than her words. The children stopped playing outside. Mothers hurried their little ones indoors. Men stood in groups, their eyes filled with suspicion. Grandma felt powerless, but she never stopped trying. She believed that as long as she lived, she had a duty to be a voice of peace. But then came that night. The night when shouts turned into war cries, when stones broke windows, when fire touched the street, and when her own house was no longer safe. And now, with someone banging on her door, demanding she open, Grandma's greatest fear had come true. She was no longer just a witness. She was now a target. The banging grew louder. Bang, bang, bang. Open the door, Grandma, the voice screamed, or we'll break it down. Grandma shut her eyes tight. She had no one beside her, no one to protect her. And then something happened that no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. The banging on the door shook the entire house. Grandma's heart pounded as if it wanted to leap out of her chest. Her breathing grew shallow, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold onto the wall for support. Open it, the angry voice shouted again, louder this time, almost breaking through the silence of her small home. She whispered a prayer under her breath, tears running down her face. Lord, please protect me. Please protect this house. I am too old for this. Suddenly the banging stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Grandma stood frozen, straining her ears, waiting to hear the next move. Then she heard the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy steps circling the house. Someone was outside looking for a way in. Grandma's frail body shivered. She wanted to scream for help, but who would come? Everyone had locked themselves inside their own homes. No one dared step out into the war zone that their neighborhood had become. Her eyes darted toward the kitchen, to the back door. She wondered if she should run, but her legs were weak. Her knees ached. She knew she couldn't get far. Then came the sound that made her heart nearly stop. Metal scratching against the window. Someone was trying to force it open. No, no. Please, she cried softly, covering her ears as if it would block out the terror. But before the window could give way, another voice shouted from outside. A voice she recognized. Hey, leave her alone. It was David, the boy from next door. He wasn't really a boy anymore, he was 22 now. But to Grandma, he would always be the child she used to give cookies to after school. His voice rang out with courage that surprised even her. What are you doing, huh? She's just an old woman. Go fight your own battles somewhere else. There was a pause. Then angry laughter. Mind your own business, kid, unless you want to join her. I said leave her alone. David shouted again, this time with more strength. For a moment, silence filled the air. Grandma's trembling hands dropped to her sides as she listened. Then the footsteps moved away from her house. Whoever had been banging on her door was now focused on David. Grandma rushed to the window and peeked through the broken glass. Her eyes widened in fear. 3 men stood in the middle of the street, their faces twisted with anger, their fists clenched. David stood across from them, his jaw tight, his fists balled up too. He was brave, but he was only 1 against 3. David? No. Grandma whispered, pressing her hand to the glass. She wanted to call him back, to tell him to hide, but he was already stepping closer to the men. The night air grew heavier, the silence broken only by distant shouting from other parts of the street. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, watching but refusing to come outside. Everyone was too afraid. One of the men pushed David hard in the chest. David stumbled back but didn't fall. He stood his ground. I won't let you touch her, he shouted. Grandma's heart ached. She wanted to protect him, just as he was trying to protect her. But she was powerless. Her body was too old, too weak. She could only stand and pray. Then the first punch was thrown. One of the men swung at David, hitting him on the cheek. David stumbled, clutching his face, but he didn't back down. He fought back, punching the man in return. The sound of fists meeting flesh echoed through the night, mixing with Grandma's cries. Please stop. Please. Enough, she screamed through the broken window, her voice shaking. But no one listened. The fight grew uglier. David was brave, but he was outnumbered. The men shoved him, hit him, kicked him. Grandma screamed louder, her voice raw, begging them to stop. She banged her fists against the wall, desperate for someone, anyone, to help. But then it happened. One of the men reached into his pocket and pulled out something shiny. The streetlight caught it, making it gleam. Grandma's blood ran cold. It was a knife. Her scream pierced the night. No. Please, not the knife. Please stop. David froze for a moment, staring at the blade. The other two men held him back, as the one with the knife stepped closer. Let's see how brave you are now, the man sneered. Grandma's knees gave way, and she fell to the floor. Her whole body shook as tears blurred her vision. She had never felt so helpless. She wanted to run outside, to throw herself between David and the knife, but her body refused to move. The man raised the knife high, and in that terrifying moment, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Loud, piercing, growing closer. The men froze. David gasped for breath, his shirt torn, his face bruised. Grandma's eyes widened with hope as the red and blue lights began flashing at the end of the street. But before she could feel relief, before she could whisper her thanks, something happened that no one expected. The man with the knife didn't run. He lunged forward. Grandma's scream tore through the night as the blade came down. The knife came down fast. Grandma's cry split the night like thunder. But just before the blade could strike David, someone slammed into the attacker from the side. The knife clattered to the ground, spinning across the pavement. It was Officer Miller, the local policeman who had rushed out of the squad car the moment he saw the fight. His strong arms wrestled the attacker to the ground, pinning him with a force that made the other two men scatter like frightened rats. Stay down, Officer Miller barked, his voice sharp, full of authority. David gasped, stumbling backward, clutching his bruised face. His chest rose and fell rapidly as relief washed over him. He had been seconds away from disaster. Grandma, still on her knees inside her house, sobbed with gratitude. Her whole body trembled as she whispered over and over again, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." But the street was far from calm. The sirens grew louder as two more police cars rolled in, their lights flashing red and blue across the neighborhood walls. Neighbors who had been hiding inside peeked out again, their curtains fluttering nervously. The warlike chaos seemed to freeze under the weight of the flashing lights. The officers dragged the man with the knife to his feet, twisting his arms behind him. His face burned with rage as he shouted, "This isn't over. You'll all pay for this. Every one of you." His words cut through the night like sharp blades. Even as he was shoved into the back of the police car, his eyes darted toward Grandma's house, filled with hate. Grandma shivered. She could feel it in her bones. This man meant every word. David leaned against the lamppost, breathing heavily, his face bloodied but alive. Two officers rushed to check on him. "You're lucky, son," one of them said, patting his shoulder. A second later, and that knife would have found its mark. Grandma pushed herself up slowly, her old legs aching, and shuffled to the front door. Her hands shook as she opened it. She stepped outside, her eyes fixed on David. "My boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. She reached for him, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. David managed a weak smile. "I couldn't let them hurt you, Grandma. You've always protected us. Tonight it was my turn." Her heart swelled with both pride and pain. She hugged him tightly as her weak arms could manage. Around them, the officers tried to calm the street, but the neighbors continued murmuring, their voices laced with fear. Some blamed David for stepping in. Others whispered that Grandma was cursed, that trouble always seemed to follow her house. The words stung. Grandma lifted her head and looked at them. "Cursed?" she repeated, her voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have lived here for 40 years. I have fed your children, shared your pain, shared your joy. And now, when evil threatens us, you turn your eyes on me." Her words silenced them for a moment. "But fear has a way of making people cruel," one woman muttered. "Maybe it would be better if she left. Trouble always starts around her." The words felt like daggers in Grandma's heart. She staggered back, clutching her chest. David glared at the woman. "Don't you dare talk about her like that. She's the reason this neighborhood was ever good in the first place." But the whispers grew louder. Neighbors pulled away from Grandma, their eyes suspicious, fearful. It was easier to blame the old woman than to face the truth. That hate was eating them alive. The police finally drove away with the arrested man, and the street fell into uneasy silence. One by one, doors closed, locks clicked, and lights went out. The neighborhood returned to darkness, but the peace was fake, fragile, ready to shatter again at the slightest spark. Grandma and David went back inside her house. She cleaned his wounds carefully, her hands gentle despite their shaking. "You could have died tonight," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "But I didn't," David replied, trying to smile through the pain. "Because maybe God wanted me to be here for you." Grandma kissed his forehead, just like she did when he was a little boy. "You are brave, David. But bravery is heavy. It brings danger. You must be careful." For a moment, there was quiet between them. Grandma looked at the broken vase on the floor, the shattered glass glittering in the faint light. It was a symbol of everything that was falling apart. She turned to David. "This neighborhood is sick. Hate has made it sick. And if something is not done soon, we will lose everything." David nodded slowly, but before he could answer, a sudden noise shattered the stillness. It was the sound of another window breaking. Crash! Both of them froze. David jumped to his feet, his fists clenched, his eyes darting toward the noise. Grandma gasped, her hand covering her mouth. It wasn't coming from her house this time. It was coming from across the street. Screams followed. A woman's voice shouted for help. Then a child cried out in terror. David ran to the window, his eyes wide. "Grandma, it's the Clark's house. Someone's attacking them." Grandma's heart sank. The war in the neighborhood wasn't over. It was just beginning. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the street again, sharper, louder, like the neighborhood itself was crying out in pain. David pulled the curtains back, his eyes wide. Across the street, the Clark's front window was shattered, shards glittering on the ground like cruel stars. Inside, shadows moved violently. A woman screamed. A scream so full of terror that Grandma felt her blood run cold. Then came the sound of a child crying, high-pitched and desperate. David didn't hesitate. "I'm going over there," he said, rushing toward the door. "No, David, wait," Grandma cried, reaching for him. Her voice shook with fear. "It's too dangerous. Please don't go." But David had already flung the door open. The night air swallowed him as he sprinted across the street. Grandma stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding like a drum. She wanted to run after him, but her legs refused. She was too old, too weak, trapped by her body while her spirit screamed for action. Through the broken window of the Clark's house, David's voice rang out. "Stop it! Leave them alone!" The shadows inside froze. Then, a man stepped into the dim light. It wasn't just any man. It was Mr. Clark's cousin, a hot-tempered fellow named Brian, who had moved in only a few months ago. People in the neighborhood never trusted him. He was quick to anger, always stirring up trouble. Tonight, his eyes burned like fire, and in his hand was a metal pipe. "Stay out of this, boy," Brian barked, his voice rough and dangerous. "This is family business." But it wasn't family business. Behind him, Mrs. Clark crouched in the corner, shielding her little daughter with trembling arms. Her face was pale with fear. This wasn't an argument. This was violence. David stepped forward, fists clenched. "You're hurting them. Put it down." Brian laughed, the sound cruel and mocking. "You think you can tell me what to do in my own house?" He swung the pipe through the air, the whooshing sound making Mrs. Clark cry out again. Grandma's voice, though weak, rang out from across the street. "Please stop this. Stop this madness before someone gets hurt." Her cries carried through the night, but just like before, they were swallowed by anger. David tried to move closer, but Brian swung the pipe again, this time hitting the edge of the table. The wood splintered into pieces. Little Emma screamed, clinging tighter to her mother. Grandma pressed her hands together, praying desperately. "Lord, give him strength. Protect them. Don't let hate win tonight." The neighbors peeked through their curtains again, just like before. But no one stepped outside. No one came to help. Fear had chained them all inside their homes. They watched like silent ghosts as their street crumbled into violence. David raised his voice. "If you don't stop, I'll call the police right now." Brian's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "Police? Do you think I care about the police? They can't protect you. They can't protect her." He jabbed the pipe toward Mrs. Clark, who whimpered and shielded Emma tighter. "This whole street is falling apart, and I'm just getting started." Grandma gasped. Her chest ached as if knives were stabbing her heart. She could see it clearly now. The neighborhood wasn't just in trouble. It was sinking, drowning in hate, and no one seemed strong enough to save it. But David didn't back down. "Then you'll have to go through me first," he said, stepping between Brian and the Clarks. His voice shook, but his body stood tall, like a shield. Brian's face twisted with fury. He raised the pipe high, ready to strike. Grandma screamed, her voice raw. "No, please. Not again." But before the pipe could fall, the front door burst open. It was Mr. Clark. He had just arrived, his eyes blazing with fury at the sight of Brian threatening his wife and child. Without a second thought, he lunged at Brian, tackling him to the floor. The pipe clattered to the ground. The two men rolled across the floor, punching, kicking, grunting like wild animals. Mrs. Clark screamed. Little Emma cried harder. David jumped in, trying to pull them apart, but the fight was vicious. The sound of fists striking flesh echoed like drumbeats of war. Grandma stood helpless in the doorway of her own house, tears blurring her vision. She had never seen anything like this before. Neighbors, family, tearing each other apart like enemies. "Stop. Please stop," she cried into the night. Her voice cracked, her heart breaking. "Don't you see what's happening? This is not who we are. We are killing ourselves." But her voice was swallowed once more by the violence. Then came the moment no one could forget. Brian, pinned down, reached for the fallen pipe. His fingers brushed against it. Mr. Clark raised his fist to strike again. David shouted, trying to grab the weapon first. Mrs. Clark screamed. And in that terrible second, the decision of who grabbed it first would change everything. Brian's fingers closed around the cold metal pipe first. His eyes lit up with rage as he swung it upward. David dove forward, grabbing his arm just in time. The two of them struggled, their muscles straining, faces red with effort. The pipe wavered dangerously in the air, inches from Mr. Clark's head. Mrs. Clark screamed, clutching Emma tightly. "Stop it. Please stop." Grandma's hands clutched her chest as if she could hold her breaking heart together. "Lord, don't let it happen, don't let it happen," she whispered desperately. With a loud grunt, David twisted Brian's wrist. The pipe slipped free and clattered across the wooden floor. Mr. Clark kicked it away with all his strength, sending it spinning into the corner. For a brief moment, there was relief, but only for a moment. Brian roared in fury, his face red, his veins bulging. He shoved David off him with a burst of strength and lunged for Mr. Clark again. The two men grappled like wild animals, fists flying, curses filling the air. Blood splattered across the carpet. David scrambled up, breathing hard, torn between helping Mr. Clark or shielding Mrs. Clark and Emma. He chose the latter, rushing to stand in front of them like a human wall. "Stay behind me," he shouted, his voice shaking with both fear and determination. Grandma could no longer bear it. She stepped out of her house, her weak legs carrying her slowly across the street. Her slippers slapped against the ground as tears streamed down her wrinkled face. "Enough!" she shouted, her voice trembling but full of a desperate strength. "You are tearing this neighborhood apart. This is not who we are." Her cry pierced the night. For a moment both men froze. Their chests heaved, their fists still raised, but their eyes flicked toward the old woman standing in the middle of the street, her silver hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. 40 years I have lived here," Grandma cried, her voice breaking. "I have seen you all grow. I have loved you like my own children. And now I stand here watching you destroy everything we built. Do you not see? Hate is winning. We are letting it win." Silence fell, broken only by Emma's soft sobs. The words seemed to sink into some hearts but not Brian's. His eyes blazed with fury as he spat on the ground. "You think your weak little speeches can stop me?" he sneered, wiping blood from his mouth. "This neighborhood is finished. No amount of crying from an old woman will change that." Grandma's shoulders sagged, but she lifted her chin. Her eyes shone with tears. "Then you are already lost, Brian. But I will not let hate make me like you." Brian's nostrils flared. He shoved Mr. Clark away and stormed toward the door, kicking it open with such force the hinges rattled. "This isn't over," he bellowed before disappearing into the night. The room was left in silence. Only the sound of Mrs. Clark's sobs and Emma's cries filled the air. Mr. Clark collapsed onto the couch, his face bruised and bleeding. David leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Grandma finally stepped inside, her frail body trembling. She knelt beside Mrs. Clark, stroking her hair softly. "It's over for now, child," she whispered. "You are safe. But we must stay strong. Hate will come back if we let it." Mrs. Clark clung to her hand like a lifeline, tears soaking her palm. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for standing with us." David's chest rose and fell heavily, but his eyes burned with determination. "Grandma's right," he said firmly. "This neighborhood can't survive if we keep turning against each other. We need to fight back, not with fists but with peace." His words made Grandma's heart swell with pride. For the first time in a long while, she felt hope flicker, faint but alive. Maybe the younger generation still had the strength to save what was left. But just as she thought the night was calming, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Heavy rushing footsteps. Everyone froze. David moved to the window and peeked out. His face went pale. Grandma's heart stopped. "What is it?" she whispered. David turned, his eyes wide with fear. "It's not just Brian. He's brought others. At least 10 of them. They're gathering outside." Mrs. Clark gasped and clutched Emma tighter. Mr. Clark's fists clenched despite his bleeding face. Grandma's knees weakened. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. The war that had begun with whispers and arguments was now standing right at their doorstep. Louder, angrier, more dangerous. And this time, it wasn't just one man with a pipe. It was a mob. The night that had begun with broken glass ended with broken hearts. The mob that gathered outside the Clark's house stood like a storm ready to swallow the neighborhood. Shouts filled the air, fists were raised, and anger burned like wildfire. But then, something remarkable happened. Grandma stepped out into the street, her frail frame glowing under the dim streetlight. She raised her trembling hands, her voice shaking but loud enough for all to hear. "Enough," she cried. "Enough of this hate. Enough of this war. We are neighbors, not enemies. We are destroying ourselves." For the first time, the mob hesitated. The power of her voice, so weak yet so strong, cut through their rage. David stood beside her, his battered face filled with courage. Mr. and Mrs. Clark, holding Emma close, stepped forward too. Slowly, other neighbors cracked open their doors, their fearful faces peeking into the night. It was as if Grandma's cry for peace had broken the chains of silence. One by one, people began to lower their voices. Some dropped their weapons. Others hung their heads in shame. The mob that had come to fight found themselves disarmed, not by police or fists, but by the tears of an old woman who had given her life to love them. That night did not end with victory for one side or another. It ended with a choice. A choice for the neighborhood to rebuild, to forgive, to remember who they once were before hate poisoned their hearts. It wasn't easy. Some wounds ran deep. Some neighbors never spoke again. But many others, touched by Grandma's bravery, began to mend fences, both the wooden ones and the invisible ones between their hearts. Grandma became the symbol of peace. People said it was her tears that saved the neighborhood that night, her voice that pulled them back from the edge of ruin. And though her body grew weaker with each passing year, her spirit burned brighter than ever. Whenever a quarrel arose, neighbors would remember her cry. "We are neighbors, not enemies." The lesson of that terrible night was clear. Hate can destroy a community, but even the smallest voice, spoken with love, can stop a war. Grandma's cry for peace was not just for her street. It was for everyone who has ever lived side by side with another. Because in the end, neighborhoods are not built by houses. They are built by hearts. Lightbulb life lesson. No matter how dark things become, no matter how deep the anger runs, peace always begins with one person brave enough to speak against hate. Be that person.